Well, good morning. It's great to be with you. Calvary Nexus is quite an amazing church. Bruce keeps me up to date on things that are happening, and it's just exciting to be a part of it. I can't believe just how the two of us connected. A dear friend of ours really connected us when we had lunch together at Bandits, and I thought he might be a real significant person for the Camarillo, because at that time he was overseeing the association here of all the ministerial association. And I thought it'd be great if I connected with Bruce and we had lunch at Bandits, and I just felt like after we were all done, it was like I just blew it. I blew the whole conversation and whatever. But he sends me a text, and he wants to go to this conference that we have at our church, and it was a neighborhood collective. And he said, "I'd like to come." I said, "Oh, really? Yeah." He said he would like to come, and he had indicated to me that later the only reason he came is he just wanted to support me in what I was doing. And but the interesting thing that happened was on the way home, or sometime after that, the Lord spoke to Bruce and asked him this question: "So how many neighbors do you know?" And it was one of those Kairos moments. And that's what I'm speaking on this morning is Kairos. The word Kairos means opportunity. And God brings these opportunities to us, as he did with Bruce, where he opened up his eyes and opened up his mind really to the fact that he really didn't know his neighbors. And what happened for Bruce is, as he told me, he said, "I realized that I was in rebellion to my Lord's greatest commandment. And I was really impacted by just how sensitive he was to the Lord at that time. And we've just watched things just grow and develop here at Calvary Nexus, and actually in all of Camarillo. I just see this thing exploding, and it's really a unique place to be a part of, and it's an honor to be here this morning. I want to just share with you this whole idea of Kairos, because Kairos, as I mentioned, is opportunity. It's God giving you opportunities to minister to people in some unique ways. And there's actually when you move into Kairos and you understand what it's all about, you're actually moving into a different realm where you're seeing God at work on a regular basis, and you're invited. He invites you in to be partner with him in the things that he's doing. There's a passage of scripture that I love that's in Ephesians chapter 5. And it says, "Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Be very careful, therefore, how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every Kairos, every opportunity, for the days are evil." He then goes on to say, "Therefore, do not be foolish. Do not be foolish, but understand what the will of God is." And so what he's referring to there is understanding what the will of God is on a moment by moment basis, where you begin to see God at work, and you begin to see him inviting you into things that he wants to do with you. And it's an exciting life to live. I've had so many Kairos experiences in my own neighborhood. And that's where I love being. I love being right where I live and ministering to people right where I live. And from there, it just kind of moves and it impacts people wherever I go. Just one quick example is a gal named Lynn, who one day I was prayer walking through the neighborhood, and Lynn stops me. She says, "Do you do any counseling?" And I said, "Yeah, I counseled. I've been a pastor for probably 40, 50 years, somewhere in there, and I do counseling." She said, "Well, how much do you charge?" And I said, "Well, I don't charge anything." And so she came over to our house, and my wife and I met with her, and I said, "The problem that you have really will be resolved if you have a relationship with the Lord." And Leanne invited the Lord into her life, and we baptized her. A bunch of us gathered around the pool and baptized her. And it was just a remarkable thing. But these kind of things begin to happen when you move into a Kairos lifestyle. And what I'd like to share with you also in Colossians 4, Paul says this: be wise in the way that you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity for the days. He just says, make the most of every opportunity in that context. And so he's saying, in other words, be aware of what's going on. Now, Kairos and chronos, they're two different words in the New Testament for time. Chronos has to do with your calendar, has to do with your watch, has to do with things to do, all the things that you organize yourself to do. And those are things that you should do. But kairos are things that kind of begin to fit into your everyday life. And if you're aware of what the Father's doing, then you find yourself living really one of the most exciting lives there is. And once I entered into this life, it's just radically changed the way I live my life. There's some things, though, that on the Kairos Adventure that you will want to be a part of your life in order for these Kairos experiences to really occur on a daily basis, to be aware of them. And the first thing is that you need to become incarnational. For instance, Jesus, he left heaven, came to earth. In John chapter 1, verse 12, actually in Eugene Peterson's translation, he renders it this way, that Jesus, the Word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. And this is really counterintuitive to us because we don't particularly care to do that. At least when I was led to the Lord in Thailand back in a long time ago, the guy spent 9 months, Dave McNeil was his name, he spent 9 months sharing the Lord with me, and then one day I finally gave my life to the Lord. Do you remember the person who led you to the Lord? The time that they took, and then eventually you came into relationship with him. And so when he had finally led me to the Lord, because I was a little slow, he said, now go do what I did. And my response to him was absolutely no way. I am not going to do that. But when I came back, I came back from Thailand, and my family lived in Ventura. So all of a sudden, I was compelled to tell everybody I could about what happened to me. But my initial response is absolutely no way, I don't want to do that. And so in order to begin to enter into the Kairos life, you have to be willing to go and begin to talk with people and relate to people who are outside the church. I know when I first came to the Lord, I didn't know any believers. As time progressed, all I knew were believers, and I didn't know any unbelievers. And so what the Lord has done is he's shaken my little life up, because sometimes pastors can get so consumed with the church that they miss out on people outside the church. And so what has happened to me is through loving my neighbor, my world has just grown in an amazing way. Jesus says this in Mark. He said, 16:15, he said, go into all the world and preach the gospel. What's he saying? We have to go. We have to go. All right? We have to go. And then in Matthew chapter 28, the Great Commission, he says this. He makes this statement. As you go, we've heard go and make disciples, but it says as you go. It's a participle. As you go, and he goes on to say, to make disciples and teach them. And then Jesus said, lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And one of the things that I love about that and what I've experienced, when I'm involved with the Great Commission, the Lord begins to show up. You know what I'm talking about? And you begin to talk to somebody about the Lord, and all of a sudden you sense the Lord's presence. And he's rooting you on. He's there. He's giving you the words to speak in the moment. Another thing that's important if you want to be a part of the Kairos Adventure is this, and that is don't ever try to make anything happen. I have a dear friend of mine who passed away, Dallas Willard, and Dallas Willard is world-renowned, was world-renowned. I mean, they're still reading his books everywhere and hearing him speak on YouTube. But Dallas said to me, Lynn, if you keep moving forward with what you're doing, we're going to see revival and awakening. And I really believe what he was getting at is the whole idea of loving neighbor. If that keeps moving forward, we're going to see a great revival. Another thing that Dallas said to me, said this: don't ever try to make anything happen. Let that settle in. Don't ever try to make anything happen. I know for us that's counterintuitive, but if you want to move into the Kairos life, then you have to move to a place where you realize you can't do anything. In fact, Jesus makes this statement about himself, and it's really, it's profound. It's in the Message Bible again, and it says this: so Jesus explained himself at length. I'm telling you this straight. The Son can't independently do a thing, only what he sees the Father doing. What the Father does, the Son does. The Father loves the Son and includes him in everything he is doing. And then it says in verse 30 of chapter 5, I can't do a solitary thing on my own. I have to confess to you, I lived as a pastor trying to make things happen, and I realized nothing happened. But when Jesus said that, what happened, it completely changed the way I now understand how to live my life. And it's such a freeing way not to try to make something happen. And in John chapter 21, 25, Jesus said he could do nothing on his own. He could only do what the Father was doing. He said that in John 5. But in John 21, 25, he says this: Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. What Jesus, by not being able to do everything on his own, many, many things occurred. In fact, all the things that he did in his life, if the books of all of the world could not contain all the things. He was busy. And so one of the things that I have learned is to enter into the Kairos life, or enter into a life with the Father. There's actually 4 things that I do. Want to take these down? These are important. It's radically changed my life. The first thing is I pray. I pray almost every day. I'm walking through my neighborhood praying. And on Tuesdays specifically, I pray for my neighbors by name. And then I wait. Early on when I started this, I thought nothing was going to happen. And I asked God, I said, God, is this really a kind of a foolish exercise that I'm doing as far as praying through my neighborhood? And that night, the Lord brought a neighbor from across the street. She was involved in reading, she's a script reader, and she was reading the new movie that I think it'll be out this year. That's a follow-up to The Passion of the Christ. And she started asking me question after question about it. She's now involved in a Bible study in our house on Monday nights. And so I pray, and then I wait. And I wait with anticipation, because I know if I prayed, God's going to respond. And then I watch. I watch to see what he does in response to my prayer and waiting. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, someone will invite me to do a funeral in our neighborhood. I mean, just one thing after another has occurred through the years that are just beyond my imagination. So I watch, and then he invites me in, and I join my Father. And this is how Jesus lived his life. It's the most exciting life you'll ever want to live. I always was trying to figure out, how can the church, in an authentic, natural and supernatural way, reach out to people in our community? For years I was trying, how can that happen? But when I put together the idea of loving my neighbors, my actual neighbors, and Kairos, all of a sudden it just came alive. And I've experienced things with the Father that are just beyond unbelief. I mean, beyond my amazement. The third thing that's necessary for the Kairos life is a compassionate heart for people. Compassion is Jesus, when he, in Matthew chapter 9, verse 35, Jesus was he was going through all the towns and the villages, and he was preaching the kingdom and healing everybody. But then it says that he looked at them and he saw them as downcast and helpless people. And so compassion is something that is essential. And one of the things that's hard for us to do who are in the church is to not see people in a judgmental way. If you can look back in your own life and the kind of life you lived before you were a believer, and wouldn't it be great if someone had compassion on you? I mean, because they've had compassion on you, you can turn around and have compassion on others. Because I remember my life was not good. And I had a buddy that just reached out to me with compassion and radically changed my life. There's a couple up in Chico. They were an elderly couple. Their pastor was emphasizing the importance of just reaching out and loving your neighbors. And so they started doing this, and as they were loving each one of their neighbors, they came across a couple who were living together but weren't married. And so they just like, do we do this with them too? Because they were giving gifts out to all of them, all the neighbors, just to show them that they loved them. And then finally they just decided, yeah, we better do this. We better love them too. And so they gave them a gift, and they were touched by it. Then one day, this young couple who weren't married, who were living together, had a baby. And now they were being pressed a little bit harder. Do we love them? Do we give them a gift for their new baby? And finally they said, yeah, we're going to do that. And so what happened was they got a nice gift and brought it over and gave it to him. And the young couple was very touched by what they had done. And then what happened later, the elderly gentleman, the husband, had a stroke. And he was paralyzed on one side of his body and could do nothing. Guess who it was who mows the lawn and took care of him, took care of their home? It was this young couple. They reached out to them and continued to love them. I don't know how it all ended up, but that was the beginning of a relationship, because mercy, as James says, mercy triumphs over judgment. And compassion is something that is learned, and where you actually begin to feel it. I know my wife, when we were married and been married some years, before we had children, we had a wonderful life together. But when children came in, because I'd come from a dysfunctional home, I didn't know how to be the father. I didn't know how to be a great husband to my wife. I didn't know how. I just didn't have it. Didn't have the tools for it. And she would nag me. That's the way I viewed it. I viewed her as nagging me. But one day, after years of her trying to get me to care for her and care for the kids, I found her at the dining room table, and she was just weeping. And I said, Joe, what's wrong? She said, I don't feel loved. And what happened at that point, I had compassion for her. So I felt it. Compassion really, actually, it can radically change how you view life. And what happened was, I said to her, well, what do you want me to do? And she says, Lynn, well, you at least start washing dishes. I must have been a jerk. And so I started washing dishes, and as time progressed, she said, Lynn, it's more than just washing dishes. And so I started to learn, it started to grow, but it all stemmed from this whole experience with her at the table, and I felt compassion. The word compassion, it really means to feel another's pain in the Latin, and in the Greek, it means to feel from the bowels or from the gut. And when you begin to have this kind of feeling for people, it moves you. And that's what moved Jesus. Beside the fact that he was being led by his Father, from his bowels, he was just, feeling the pain of all these people being like sheep without a shepherd. And so I'll just share an example. We have a neighbor across the street, and her name is Leah. Leah's now she's a senior, but when this happened to her, she was a junior in high school, and she's a volleyball player, great volleyball player on the volleyball team. And she and her brother went up to San Luis Obispo to visit a friend, and her brother Davis, the two of them are very close, brother and sister, very close. And they were in the friend's backyard, and he was swinging a driver. And as he went through, Leah walked into the driver, drivers with a big head on it, and hit her right here so hard that the retina just shot out. See, what you're feeling right now is, you're feeling it down here. She's blind in that eye now. They have done an amazing job. You would not know it if you saw her. But her brother Davis says, I still hear that sound when I hit her. And they're very close. They're still very close. But see, that's the compassion. When you begin to feel what people are going through in your neighborhood and where you work and where you play, where you go to school, you begin to feel the way Jesus felt about people when he saw them as sheep without a shepherd. And so what Jesus does is he uses two examples to help his disciples understand what he was feeling about the people as sheep without a shepherd was one, and that he also pointed out that it was like a field that needed to be harvested. And so a sheep without a shepherd, most people don't know what sheep are all about and raising sheep, and some of you may have read that Shepherd Looks at the 23rd Psalm. It's a great book. But it gives you a better insight into what sheep are like and how important to shepherd. I was rooming with a fella, his name was Andrew, he's pastor in Vineyard in Oxford, England. And he had graduated from Oxford with a shepherding degree. His father was a shepherd, and so when his father retired from shepherding, he took over the role as the shepherd for the sheep in their family. And he also graduated from Oxford with a degree in pastoring, or actually shepherding people. But we were together one morning, and I said, it's our last day together, and I said, Andrew, I know that you're going to, I won't see you again, but could you leave me one thing about sheep and the shepherd that I don't know? And so I can remember our time together. And he said to me, well, Lynn, it's true that sheep do hear the shepherd's voice, and they do respond to the shepherd's voice. He said, when my other siblings, when they go out to the sheep, they don't pay attention to them. They may acknowledge them. But he said, even in the early morning, when I'm walking out and the sun is rising and they can only see my silhouette, they come running to me. This is the connection that the sheep have with the shepherd. And so when Jesus talks about sheep not having a shepherd, the disciples really knew what he was talking about. Because domestic sheep, if they don't have a shepherd, they will die. And if they are turned over on their back, sheep cannot right themselves. And also the sheep themselves are very fearful or timid, and even a rabbit that just goes run will cause sheep to stampede. And they can't defend themselves. Sheep can't defend themselves. And so they need their shepherd to defend them. And that's really where we are in our culture. People all around us are like sheep without a shepherd. As Jesus said, that they are harassed and helpless. And so the last thing is that sheep, when they don't have a shepherd, there is incredible tension between the sheep. They're butting each other and all the time to get positioned, to get the best, place to lay down, or the best place for food. But when the shepherd shows up, all the tension between the sheep, it just dissipates. And the next thing you know, they're all focused on the shepherd. And see, our culture, really what we need in our world, because our world is extremely divided today, right? And so the most profound thing that we can do today is bring people to the shepherd who can shepherd them and help them through the life that they're going through. In my own neighborhood, you would not believe, I could just go house to house. Every single house has been through major things, from deaths to divorces. They're all around us. And so if we see people with a compassionate heart and understand what it's like to be without a shepherd, then we'll see the significance of what Jesus was talking about here. So also, he uses another example, and he said that the harvest is really in desperate need. And so he was trying to capture their hearts by this whole idea that when he says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And so he's capturing their heart by beginning to understand, look, these people desperately need a shepherd. They desperately need someone to help them in the condition that they are in, because their harvest is ready. I believe the whole city of Camarillo is ready for harvesting, right? But it needs harvesters. It needs us to go out into the harvest field and do the harvesting. And so these disciples fully understood what it would be like. Now, I didn't know anything about harvesting at all, but for 2 years I traveled from the San Fernando Valley where I live, Porter Ranch. I'd take the back road and come through Somas and come down, because my father is right here, was right here at the time in Camarillo. He owned Camarillo Camera, and some of you may have gone to that wonderful shop way back when. But I would come up here on my day off, and I would spend it with him, either just spending time or taking him to doctor's appointments. But one of the things, while I was doing it, I would travel past these incredible fields in Somas, and all the work, the process that they go through. And I watch them from the beginning when they plow the field until ultimately it's time for harvesting. And can you imagine what it would be like if there was no one there to do the harvesting? And all of that stuff that they spent the whole X amount of time working on until they got to this point where it was time to harvest. And it would be just for naught, all the hard work. And so when Jesus uses this and says the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few, what he was getting at is that they were the harvesters. They were the ones that would begin the harvesting and do it. So imagine, let's just say, what's your name? Luke. Hi, Luke. Let's say, Luke, you have the responsibility, okay, of you now, all the buildings are gone, all the places around Camarillo are gone, because that one day that's what it was like here, all right? And you now have the responsibility, Luke, to to plant and make sure that everything is available. So you have the responsibility. You have the money and you have the people to carry this out. So how would you go about it? Now I can ask you, but I'm going to answer it for you, okay? So what you would do is you say, okay, you would go to, what's your name? Sue? You go to Sue and say, Sue, you have this section of Camarillo to work on, okay? And you can get people to help you work, and then all the way around, all of you would together, you would begin to work on this, and eventually you would bring out a harvest, but the problem is, at the end of the day, do you have enough harvesters to do it all, to make it happen? So really what Jesus is getting at here is there's a harvest field. There's a spiritual harvest field that's here. It's his harvest. And so he has actually given us a place to do the harvesting, spiritual harvesting. And that's why the neighborhood is so significant. If you go back in the Midwest, you'll see there's a farmhouse, and that farmhouse is focused on reaching working with all the fields around it. And the same is true for you. In the spiritual sense, Luke, you have a responsibility. Where do you live? Camarillo. You live in Camarillo. And you know your neighborhood, and God is the harvester. Now, you're not the harvest. You're not in charge now. He's in charge. And so where you live, that becomes the place where he has called you to work. When I first started with Neighborhood Initiative, I realized that there were, I adopted 35 homes. Of those homes, 11 of those homes went to different churches in our valley. And I began to realize, wow, what if all of the people in all of these neighborhoods, in our neighborhood, began to reach that neighborhood? What if the whole church began to reach neighborhoods where they lived? It just radically changed my mind, my understanding. So prayer is essential, and the problem is there's not enough workers. And so what Jesus emphasizes is pray the Lord of the harvest, that the Lord would raise up harvesters to harvest. And this is so important to the process. Now, if you look here, let's see if you have that one on the map of Denver, just to give you a quick. This happened in northern sector of Denver. There were 44 pastors that were meeting together for prayer for extended period of time, and they thought, we're going to release our people to work together with people from other churches. Profound, right? Because typically we have our own little borders, don't we? And I'm a part of this church, you're a part of this church. But one thing about the neighboring movement, it brings the whole church together. It's a beautiful thing. And it's where people can see us love one another. It's a beautiful setting. But all of these little bubbles, what they did is they set up a website, asked people if they would if they would put their first name and they would put their address only, no phone numbers. And so if they wanted to be a part of actually loving their neighbors, that they would fill out this information at the website. And so almost immediately 3,000 people signed up because it's in our DNA. It's really in our DNA to love our neighbors because Jesus commanded us to love our neighbors, right? And so what happened is people started signing up, and people started signing up across the country. And it just exploded. It went across the oceans. And before long, what happened was the website crashed because it couldn't contain all the people that were signing up. You're a part of a great move of God that's exciting to be a part of. And so the next thing is it's important for you to realize who you are or recognize who you are. You are an amazing, power-packed person. When Jesus called his disciples and he said this in chapter 10, Jesus called his 12 disciples to him, and he gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. As you go, proclaim this message: the kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. We are so significant. We are so amazing who we are. And I think we don't realize who we are. Jesus said we are the light of the world. And Paul said that we have power in us where we can do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could even ask or imagine. So when we begin to move out into our neighborhoods, we are bringing, because the kingdom of God is in us, we are bringing the kingdom of God into our neighborhoods and where we work and where we are. We are kingdom bearers in a sense, and we are to bring it. The next thing is that you need if you want to see Kairos, is start from your home and look for a worthy person. In Michael Green's book, Evangelism in the Early Church, he makes this comment, and I think it's profound. He says, the early church, the early Christians, what they would do is they would gain whatever households they could, and so to speak, as lighthouses, so that the light would begin to spread out into the darkness. And so if you want to see the church that's radically growing today is a church that sees their home as the center for what God's doing, not the building. The building, I love the building. I love what coming together and the gathering place. But where ministry takes place profoundly is where you live. It's radical. And see, what they were doing in the early church, they were following through what Jesus said to his disciples. He said to the 70 as well. He said, whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person. Stay in their house until you leave. As you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet. What the early Christians were doing and why we see the church expand so rapidly is they made their home the center. And they were obeying what Jesus initially commanded his disciples to do, and 70 as well. And you will begin to see God move in some amazing ways. I've had so many Kairos opportunities because I focused in my own neighborhood, and it's just spilled over into wherever I go because it starts where I live and moves out. The last thing, and I'll close with this, be shrewd. If you're going out into an environment, maybe many of you already have, where it's not really the easiest place to minister. It's much easier to minister with Christians, isn't it? But to move outside, it's not easy. And so Jesus says, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. We don't like to take risks. We don't like to go out and, we like our comfort. We just do, right? But see, if I hadn't started going out when my friend had said to me, now you go do what I did, I wouldn't have experienced all the things that I've experienced in life with the Lord in relationship. There wouldn't be people who now know the Lord because of my life. Because I joined and I partnered with the Father. And so when the Father does something, I just say, do you know what the Lord just did? Because I'm partnering with him. And I'm going to just close with this verse. I speak at, the last 2 years, I've been speaking to the staff of Through the Bible. I don't know if you're familiar with McGee and Through the Bible ministry, but I spoke to the staff, and they keep asking me to use this verse, Revelation 22:12. Look, I am coming soon. My reward is with me, and I will give to each person according to what they have done. So one day we are going to appear before the Lord on and we will be rewarded based upon what we've done in this life. Jesus said it, and he said, I will give to you based upon what you've done. But when you partner with the Father, it's absolutely the most enjoyable experience that you'll ever find. You'll never want to go back to the old way of living. So you pray, you wait, you watch, and when the Father invites you in, you join him, and you will experience Kairos. It's an exciting life. Let me pray. Father, thank you so much for this time that we've had together. Thank you, Lord, for partnering with us. Lord, that we don't have to make anything happen. Father, that you're there waiting for us to join you in the work that you're already doing. As Jesus said, my Father's always at work. And so, Lord, I just want to pray over all the people here, Lord, that they would begin to experience fully what it is to be fully engaged with their Heavenly Father and experience the life that you intended for them to experience as you use them to move your kingdom forward in the neighborhood where you've placed them or where they work or where they play. In Jesus' name, amen.